much of what black women say they think is new. What do I mean by that? They think it's because of their personal experiences. They think it's because of black men not being crap. They think that they're saying things because black men are chasing after non-black women or having sex with non-black women. Black men refuse to build, right? Black men refuse to provide and protect. And so much of how black women insult, belittle, demean black men, they think it's because of supposed black male misbehavior, right? They think all of these things are new. Well, I'm going to play a couple of clips for you guys in succession, and then we're going to address it after the fact, right? So let me pause right here, and we'll come back on the back end and speak about this.
The heterosexual couple is the basic unit of the political structure of male supremacy.
I don't need that fucking shit!
It is more efficient by far than keeping women in ghettos, camps, or even sheds at the bottom of the garden. Any woman who takes part in a heterosexual couple helps to shore up male supremacy by making its foundations stronger.
In 1979, the revolutionary feminists in Leeds wrote a manifesto, arguing that women would only be free if they stopped having sex with men.
Giving up fucking for a feminist is about taking up politics seriously. Women who are socialists are prepared to give up many things which they might enjoy because they see how these things tie into and support the whole system of economic class oppression which they are fighting. They will resist buying Cape apples because the profits go to South Africa. Obviously, it's more difficult for some feminists to give up penetration, which is so fundamental to the system of oppression which we are fighting.
The revolutionary feminists advocated what they called political lesbianism. This meant becoming a lesbian for political reasons, whether you fancied women or not.
We're heterosexual women who were on our side. But what I could never understand, and I did resent, was them going home to men at night. It just seemed such a contradiction. And often I would get very angry when I would challenge them about this, and they would say, well, that's just the way I am, I just don't fancy women, having no understanding at all of the fact that sexuality is a social construct and that we all make choices depending on the way that we want to live in the world we want to see.
Now you see where some of the disdain for black men originates from. These are radical, this is primarily in Britain, radical lesbian feminist with such disdain for men. And now, and mind you, these women were active in the 1970s, in the 1980s, right? Now you fast forward to 2021, and you have black women in America who were not even a thought back then, who weren't born back then, many of them, and they sound like these white radical feminists who were active, really active in the 1970s, in the 1980s, early 80s, mid 80s, right? So when you hear black women with such contempt for other black women in relationships with black men, having sex with black men, being married to black men, you kind of get an idea where they get this idea from. This contempt for women, right? They call them mammies and pick-me's. They call black women that want to be with black men and that defend black men and that are in relationships with black men, pick-me's, mammies, and all sorts of insulting terms. This is also why they refer to the black community as Blackistan, right? I just want y'all to kind of hear some of these things so you can get an idea. And it's very interesting to have black women who have never heard of these particular women, who think they're saying these type of things about black men and towards black men because of her own personal experience, and yet she's echoing this same sentiment that some woman was regurgitating 40 plus years ago, right? So we'll pause right there, we'll play the next clip, and then we'll give our commentary again.
I fell in love with a woman
And suddenly, a huge crisis for me, because I'd been, for all intents and purposes, heterosexual. Anything other than heterosexuality had not occurred to me. Changed my life in an absolutely radical and revolutionary way, and it was wonderful. Quite traumatic, and I have to say that it wasn't desperately easy for my husband at the time either.
The most extreme separatists argued that the planet should be reorganised, with men and women living on either side of the equator.
There were separatists who would argue, for example, that there should be a wall around the equator and that all men
that'd be fantastic. Yeah. Part of me would still think that'd be quite good now, Apart from obviously all the blokes who are my friends. At that time, I would have thought that would have been great.
What was the logic in terms of how the human race would reproduce itself?
Well, even then we were aware of huge technological breakthroughs. There's many ways in which the human race could continue to reproduce itself.
So you weren't worried about that?
That was not at the forefront of our mind, no.
One complication in this women's world was what to do with boy children.
Some women felt that they didn't want to have kids if those kids were going to be boy kids, and that they'd be afraid of raising sons and having those sons grow up into an abusive, destructive, patriarchal world, that they then had to relinquish control over their children and see their children become men in a society like this. So some women didn't want to have male children for the best of motives.
Well. Now you get an idea of where some of this isolate yourselves from black men rhetoric comes from and abort black sons rhetoric come from, right? You have radical feminists, once again active in the 1970s and early 80s, right? This particular documentary is a BBC documentary. I will leave the link in the description, but this was filmed in the 90s. And you have these women speaking, right? Speaking about aborting sons and not having sons because of their fear that these sons will grow up to be the same men that they despise, regardless of how they raise them. Isn't that what we hear from certain black female content creators about black men specifically? Right? Where they think they're new to this? You think you're saying something profound? Mind you, these are white women talking about white men primarily. Yes, there are a couple of black women in this, but it's primarily white women talking about black men. White women talking about white men. White women speaking about white men. And this was their ideology over 40 years ago. And now we have black women speaking about black men in this same way. Right? They're literally playing with the notions of building a wall across the planet where women live on one side and men live on the other side. Right? No sexual intercourse. And having essentially test tube babies. Right? So when we hear black women regurgitating these talking points, when we hear black women regurgitating this rhetoric, understand it's nothing new and understand how far we've gotten in mere decades where radical feminist thought, not just feminist thought, radical feminist thought is not being regurgitated by your run-of-the-mill everyday black woman. Not all black women, maybe not most black women, but enough. Playing with the notions of aborting black sons, thinking that they're saying something new and profound. Meanwhile, we see here that white women were having this same conversation over 40 years ago. Right? Don't also let it be lost on you the woman that left her family left her family. Mind you, that was a black woman. That was one of the few black women part of this organization. Left her family, married with a son and a daughter. Left the family to make a point, to make a political point. Became a lesbian. Nothing wrong with that. We're not going into that, but became a lesbian. And mind you, that's the same woman that said she had never even entertained the thought of being in a relationship with a woman or ever had any type of attraction to a woman beforehand. You see how powerful the mind is? Never had any attraction, never looked at any woman like that. Married, had 2 kids. Then all of a sudden she supposedly falls in love with a woman. She leaves her family because she did that. She didn't want to take her daughter and leave her son, so she just left both of them with the husband and ran off to this, radical feminist enclave or group because of her politics. So let's not forget that part also. And we're going to pause right there. We're going to bring up something else after this, another clip.
Some separatists were forced to make an agonising choice between their sons and their politics. Linda Bellos chose politics.
Had I been able to take my son to a separatist house, I would have taken my children with me. The reason I left, and left both my children, was that boys weren't allowed. And I could not, and I would not, even today. I mean, I obviously find this quite painful, but I could not leave my son and take my daughter. So my feeling was that it would be better for the children to stay together with their father. There's no doubt their father loved them.
So that was a huge decision to become a separatist in that context.
I didn't choose to become a separatist. It kind of went with my politics, and it went with that stage.
The revolutionary feminists analysed the cause of women's oppression. For them, it was male violence that kept women in their place.
Penile imperialism was the rule and control over women under male dominance through the wielding of the penis. I mean, a clear way is indecent exposure in the street. But it's rape and all other forms of sexual violence. And it's what keeps women off the streets, frightened in their homes.
So how did I forget this point? The penile imperialism point. Doesn't that sound a whole lot like big dick and swag? When some of these swirlers and divestors chastise other black women, right? You're just in love with that big dick and swag. You need to leave that alone. It's better over here on the other side. The grass is greener over here on the other side. Right? Insulting, belittling, demeaning black women for being in relationships with black men. This is some of where they get that language from. Not all of it, but much of it. So let's not forget that. Let's think about that also. When we hear them speak about relationships with black men, right? Penile imperialism, where the subjects are proud to be under that imperialism. Sounds a whole lot like black divestors and swirlers talking about black women who are in love with that big dick and swag. Once again, we'll pause right there. We'll play the next clip.
Some people might think if you don't want to look at pornography, you could choose to live your life without ever really looking at it or even knowing much about it. So why was it important for you to focus on it?
Well, personally, I kind of didn't have that option as a child because I grew up in central Manhattan and I grew up in the middle of the porn industry. So every morning going to work, I had to walk through rows and rows of porn palaces, sex shops, peep show arcades with women in little cages, like animals, kind of drugged to the eyeballs. Signs saying, girls dancing for your pleasure, our girls do anything, girls, 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 we're cheaper than the next guy. I think I was really disturbed by what I saw day in, day out, year in, year out as a child.
One of the things we did in the London group was consciousness raising around pornography, and we had rules about looking at pornography. We'd acquire pornography, preferably not buying it, giving money to pornographers, but actually asking brothers and others who held pornography. And we looked at it, but we'd only look at it in the group.
Was the anxiety that if you looked at it at home on your own, that it would be arousing or that it would be disturbing?
Disturbing. Largely it was disturbing. Sometimes it was also arousing. I mean, we discussed the extent to which women had rape fantasies. You know, it happened. Many of us, almost every one of us did. You know, what was that about? Here we were, you know, strong, lesbian feminists. Why are we having these fantasies?
I think that's one of the things I'm really grateful to the radical feminist analysis for, is that we talked about sex a lot, and we didn't just talk about sex as in who are you going out with, giggle, giggle. We talked about the structure, the fundamental structure of sexuality in society and how it might be changed. We had weekends where we talked about sexual fantasies. You know, I don't know if young women do that today. Well, they probably do, but we did it in a very specifically political way, as in kind of, where do we go from here? What do we like about our sexuality? What do we want to change? It was all really terribly exciting and very searching and probing.
And there we go. Rape fantasies. Lesbian radical feminist who wanted nothing to do with men, but secretly wanted to be sexually dominated by them. In the worst way. Somewhat turned on and aroused by rape porn. So, you construct this movement, you leave your husbands or your boyfriends, and mind you, that black woman wasn't the only one that had previously been straight, never had any type of, from their own saying, never had any feelings towards women until they were part of this movement, right? You leave men completely behind, so you say, while secretly having these fantasies about being sexually dominated by them, to the point where y'all can't even analyze and watch porn as individuals. You have to watch it as a group. And then you have conversations about secretly having rape fantasies. Not men having secret rape fantasies of raping women. Women having secret rape fantasies of men raping them. Low-key being turned on by that. Well, it's not low-key anymore. They're admitting it. So in summation of all of this that we've gone over today, this is where we are as a society. You're watching as many women, black women in specific, are regurgitating talking points that are decades old, and they think they're doing something new and profound. Abort black sons sounds a whole lot like these white women being afraid of having having male children, and also considering aborting those male children. Right? Isolating yourself from black men, which we've heard multiple black female content creators say, right? Sounds a whole lot like, well, men should be on this side of the planet and women should be on that side of the planet, which white women primarily, were saying, once again, 4+ decades ago, right? Penile imperialism, which, once again, primarily white women were speaking about, sounds a whole lot like insulting black women who are, air quotes, in love with the big dick and swag of black men. Right? Leaving your family to make a political point and for your political ideology. Right? Sounds a whole lot like certain content creators not speaking about not just divesting from black men, but divesting from the entire black community. Right? We have also, once again, political lesbianism, which in many ways might be the final end goal for some of these particular swirlers and divestors. I mean, if everything stays the same, let's think about this. If everything stays the same, but these black women decide, you know what, we're really gonna go divest, we're really gonna swirl. But yet these non-black men don't budge in their view of black women, then what else is there for these particular divestors and swirlers? If you say you're not dealing with black men no matter what, you refuse to have any children from a black man, and yet the same amount of non-black men are interested in black women, and the same amount of non-black men are not interested in black women. Black women, what do you have? But a whole lot of single, lonely, rageful black women. And that doesn't mean that just because you're single, you feel alone. But we're talking about black women that supposedly want to be in relationships with men. Right? What do you have then? Well, Morgan Stanley already told us what you have. You have the she economy. A bunch of women writ large, it wasn't just speaking about black women, a bunch of women writ large spending money more than married women because they're single, right? So that's what we have. And so that is where we're going to be. That is where we're going to be with a lot of these women that are swirlers and divestors. And so I'll leave y'all with this. I'll pause right there. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. I thought I should bring this to y'all today. I will be once again leaving the link for this documentary in the description for those of you that can stomach it. Definitely check it out. It gives you an idea of why we are where we are and some of the rhetoric that we hear now, where it originally came from. And by the way, this was not only happening in Britain. This was definitely happening in the US also. Like we know with the Combahee River Collective and all these other organizations, radical feminist organizations, not just feminists, but radical feminist organizations. And now their granddaughters, granddaughters, yes, are regurgitating some of these same talking points. And many of these women, this is the crazy part, don't even know where a lot of these things originated from. And I'll pause right there. Once again, let me know what y'all think in the comments.